So for the container demo, essentially, I'm gonna briefly show you like 3 use cases that we use Docker to kind of integrate the CI, CD, and CT, which is continuous testing workflow. We heavily use and leverage standard open source DevOps tools, things like Docker, Vagrant, Ansible scripts, and essentially, we want to use standardized tooling so that it makes it easy to extend and also to maintain. Now, the tests themselves are written, as Jakob mentioned, in a variety of languages, along with the associated, unit test frameworks that goes along with each language. So things like Java has, JUnit, TestNG, Python has PyTest, Ruby has RSpec, and et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, we integrate the different kind of tests, the tooling and the ecosystem into our underlying framework. Okay. Now, the first scenario, it's going to be a very, very simplified. We tear down the different component areas, like the different functional areas, into, like, for example, when we're testing web apps, we have the web app side of things. We have the Selenium. If you're using browser-based testing, we have the Selenium piece, as well as the language along with the framework, right? The tests themselves are written in a specific language. In this example, I'm using Python as the language of choice for the tests, and so we have Tomcat running in a container, and we have the Selenium component, the Selenium server in a separate container, and then finally we have the framework slash SDK for lack of a better name, that kind of is used to kind of run all the different tests, right? So it looks something like this from a diagram perspective, right? So we have Tomcat in a container, Selenium in a separate piece as well, and finally the tooling slash framework piece of it in a separate container, versus something like this on the right hand side, where we have Tomcat in a separate server, and then we have a cluster of machines that are using Selenium Grid, for example, and then we have another piece that's kind of like the test server, right? The server that runs all the different kinds of tests. Oops, yep, let me switch. So essentially, looks something like this. So once we launch Tomcat, okay, and then we launch, oops, not that. We launch the Selenium server, okay. Finally, we run the functional test. In this example, you're not going to see anything on the screen because it's running headlessly, right? So it's running without the UI inside of the container, so you won't see anything. Although there are options to kind of take screenshots slash recordings also. That option is available, but just kind of simplify the demo, we're not going to go over that. Now, once it finished running, essentially, we come over here, and we'll generate a report, just like what Jakob showed earlier. A similar kind of report. And if you kind of expand, and it's basically hitting the web app here, and then just basically hitting all the child subpages and taking screenshots along the way. Okay, and it all ran inside of the container headlessly.
So when you're talking about saying about container, it means that you have a kind of a apartment on one machine, and then we have combined all these different technologies like Apache, the other Tomcat, which are running on the same machine. Is it correct?
Yes, that's right. So we tear it down into each layer, and it's all running on one machine. Yeah, we strip it down to the thinnest possible layer. It's possible, albeit I'm using a very simplified web app, but depending on the use case, like for example, some applications that are like legacy types are much more difficult, and in that case, probably this piece to completely go outside. But essentially, the idea is we try and break it down into the simplest possible pieces, so that we can kind of combine and reuse them as necessary. Okay.
But in that case, you are limited to the capacity, right? Capacity of one machine.
That's right.
You need to run
a
lot of tests in parallel. Yeah, go ahead.
So depending on how much tests on the kind of load it's going to run, the machine itself has to be scaled up or scaled down accordingly, right? Depending on it's a cost thing. So assuming that it's going to run a lot of tests, then we have to kind of scale up on the machine specs. So make sure we have enough cores, enough memory, and things like that. So yeah.
That's correct. That's what I'm saying. In future, you may face the problem of scaling up.
That's right.
That solution is scalable enough or actually flexible enough to accommodate that.
Well, yeah, it depends. We could scale up or scale sideways, right? Horizontally too. So with Docker, it gives you the capability, right? The option of if you need to scale sideways. Again, it comes down to cost, depending on depending on which is a better option. Then you kind of adjust accordingly. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. No problem. No problem. So